Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel. I'm Dharma Helper, and this is DH Reviews. This is my Season 1, Episode 8 review of Gotham. If you missed any of my previous Gotham reviews, there will be a link down below, as well as an annotation behind me on the screen for you to click. You can click either of those, and that'll take you right to the Gotham playlist that has all of my reviews to date for you to watch. Also, earlier this week, I put out my Season 1, Episode 3 review of Constantine. For those of you interested in my thoughts on that series, there will be a link in the description down below to my reviews of Constantine for you to check that out. Season 1, Episode 8 of Gotham was called The Mask, and the main story was dealing with the aftermath of last week's episode and how that affects Gordon and his relationships, as well as introducing a character called Richard Sionis, who is, I assume, the precursor to the Black Mask, and dealing with his sort of criminal activities, because the way he hires people for his firm is he gets these office workers to fight, and the winner gets the job. And so it's dealing with investigating the death of one of these workers and tying that to Richard Sionis, and dealing with the hurdles of police work that he has to go through again in that aftermath of last week's episode. Also, in this week's episode, the noose starts to tighten a little bit around Fish's neck, and we start to see her plans come undone or start to flourish, depending on which way you look at it and depending on which way you fall. And so that's pretty much the story of the episode, is Richard Sionis, the murder or death of one of these office workers, and then again the aftermath of last week's episode and dealing with that sort of shakedown. So let's talk about the characters that we saw in this week's episode, and let's talk about the characters on the side of the law, and let's start with Gordon. And in this week's episode, we see Gordon again take very much a soldier attitude and a soldier persona going into things, because the theme in this episode was fighting. You know, we have on the one hand we have Jim Gordon and his will to fight on. We have Richard Sionis, and his whole persona of the Black Mask, and his making these people fight for wealth and for a job. And then we have the thing with Bruce and his fight. So a big theme in this episode was fighting, and how that ties into Gordon is he says in the episode, I don't like fighting, I don't enjoy fighting, but someone has to take up the torch here. Somebody has to fight for a better Gotham, and whatever happens, that's going to be me. I'm going to keep doing that. And we see him struggle with the repercussions again of last week's episode, and the implication that these police officers in the GCPD are not going to help him, and they don't help him in this episode. They treat him like a pariah, and so it impacts his personal life, his professional life quite a bit. And in terms of his personal life, he and Barbara have a lot to talk about in this episode, and a lot to work through moving forward, because Barbara's got very much almost post-traumatic stress disorder, or very much lingering trauma to deal with her kidnapping and everything that's going on with Gotham. And so he's dealing with that on one hand and the police department on the other. But he handles it well, I thought, in this episode. You know, again, he doesn't back down. He doesn't shy away from the things that he has to do. But he has to change course at some point. You know, he's got Captain Essen and Harvey now, and Alfred in the MCU. But he needs, now that he has all these people behind him, he needs a different operation, a different way to do things, because it's not working the way that he did things last episode. So he needs a different way of operating. And to me, in this episode, Gordon's, again, he's in that warrior soldier mindset, and in that confrontation with Richard Sionis, he almost kills Richard with the sword. He's got his sword like that. He almost kills Richard. So what's interesting to me is that the effect, like I've been saying in my reviews, the effect that Gotham has on these people, and the fact, going back to what Carmine said about Gotham being on a knife edge, we're starting to see the cracks in Jim. And the wider those cracks get, the more it's going to be difficult for him to reel himself back and to not enjoy fighting. So that's going to be something to watch out for, is those cracks in Jim. So let's talk about Harvey. And in this episode, Harvey, we see the aftermath again, the aftermath of last week's episode. And, Harvey may not be perfect. Harvey may not be as much of a soldier as Jim, in that, they're doing this for the right reasons, but Harvey is Jim's partner. And he does that in this episode. He is Jim's partner in this episode. He understands that you have to go along to get along, as he says, but he also understands that everybody in the police department is spineless. They are cowards, and they should be ashamed of themselves for how they handled themselves last episode. And he puts them to task, and he says, you know what? Jim Gordon is one of us. And if you're going to treat one of us like that, then you don't deserve to be a cop. Jim Gordon is a police officer. He's a cop. He's a family member. And if we treat him like crap, then what does that say about us? So get your stuff in gear and help me find my partner. And so to see that from Harvey, and to see that flash of, again, the cop that we saw in The Spirit of the Goat, that was satisfying. And that was cool to see that, he understands the whole thing about going along to get along and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, he's got Jim's back in a way that nobody else does. And that was rewarding. And we're seeing more of that character arc develop. And the way that the show has done that is pretty cool and pretty awesome to see. Let's talk about Captain Essen. Captain Essen in this episode is wrestling with her regret about leaving Jim behind. And the thing that I want to bring up about Captain Essen is, okay, now you have the captain of the GCPD, who agrees with you, who is working with you actively. She is the first person to help Detective Bullock run down those addresses to look for Jim. So, okay, you have her, and now the ripple effect is going to start to happen. It's going to be a trickle-down type ripple effect, a journey of 1,000 steps, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. That sort of mentality of, okay, now you have the starting point, and now we're going to slowly start to see these ripple effects of a police department that is effective and not corrupt. And we saw that a little bit with everybody else, but mostly with Harvey and with Essen. And so, again, with Martinez and stuff like that and all those other police officers, they're slowly starting to get in line and to realize that there's a way to do things that is not corrupt and is effective and honorable. And that's what I like to see. So wrapping my thoughts up about the GCPD, let's talk about Edward Nygma and his scene, which was my favorite scene probably to date in terms of the series, with the medical autopsy and stuff. I talked very briefly when I talked about him and Kris Kringle. I talked about motivations for him to become the Riddler. And one that we saw in this episode was the fact that he's undervalued and underappreciated and underutilized in the GCPD. He could be doing all these different things and solving all these different crimes, but the people around him write him off, and that's going to make him angry and resentful and going to turn him into the Riddler. And the thing that's beautiful about the show and about that character is that it's telling us, again, that anybody can have one bad day, or anybody can go from Edward Nygma to the Riddler. And we're seeing that transformation. And we're seeing that these characters, these villains that we're familiar with, are in many ways human, many ways like us, many ways flawed, or just angry, or just upset and alone. And that's why that they are the way that they are. Gotham City is turning them into these villains as much as it is turning the police corrupt or turning Harvey into an isolated, scared sort of detective. The weight of the city is turning these people into things that they need to be to survive. And what the Riddler, what Mr. Freeze, what Catwoman, Poison Ivy, what they need to be to survive isn't always going to be good. And that's what we saw out of Enigma this episode. And that's what I enjoyed out of Enigma the most in the whole series. Was this episode, was Enigma's scene. So that kind of wraps up my thoughts on that side of the law for the characters. Let's talk about, very briefly, let's talk about Barbara. Probably my nitpick of the episode was talking about Barbara's sort of flip-floppy behavior in this episode. It seemed a little bit forced, a little bit sketchy in terms of, in one sentence she would be very supportive of Jim, and in the very next sentence she would, snap at him or say something disrespectful or say something a little bit uncalled for. And to me, that seemed forced. And it seemed like where previously they were developing a very interesting sort of slow-burning tension between the two of them, in this episode it was very quick fire, very forced, very unnatural in the way that it was presented. And I hope that dials back a little bit. And again, we get that slow-burning tension between her and Gordon and Montoya and all these different other people that are playing around with it. But in this episode, I wasn't satisfied with that. So that kind of covers that. Let's talk about the Penguin in this episode. Oswald, as I said, is really working against Fish in this episode. And the way that he does that is he snatches up her new Oswald, I guess. I don't know his name. Who cares about his name? He's about to die. So he snatches up her new Oswald and interrogates him about her strategies and her secrets. And he learns that she's got somebody working in Carmine's camp. And so, again, that goes back to that idea of Fish sort of working to further her plans, and then Penguin undermining her plans, and which is going to happen first. And so to me, Penguin in this episode is, again, working very hard to stick to the script, stick to that mosaic, and it's going to be interesting to see if he can uncover the truth about Liza and about Fish. So talking about Liza and Fish, Fish in this episode, they start off, they're at peace with Penguin and all that, and that in itself was, nice, a nice scene, nice tension, nice way to establish that regardless of what Maroni says to Penguin or what Carmine says to Fish, the two of them are going to do whatever they want. The two of them are going to be at each other's throats constantly. And so talking more about Fish and Liza are, in this episode, trying to get a ledger from Carmine. And Fish tries to get Liza to do that, and Liza doesn't necessarily want to do that. So to me, again, it goes back to, is Carmine going to find out about Liza? Is Liza going to tell Carmine, or is Liza going to tell Fish? What's going to happen with that? And I honestly don't anticipate Fish having much success. Her plan is coming undone, in my opinion. The scene with Fish's mother, that's Fish's mom, that is singing all that. That was nice to see, and again, nice to tie into that theme of Gotham turning these people into what they are. And so, while I might not necessarily be as against Fish as I was previously, again, I still think that she's going to lose. I feel sorry for her. I feel like she doesn't deserve necessarily a lot of the things that happened to her, but she's going to lose. Liza doesn't have the nerve that she has, and we saw that in this episode. We saw that Liza is having second thoughts, is having doubts. She doesn't have the nerve to do what Fish is asking her to do. Carmine has treated her very nicely, and that's that's getting in her head and getting in the way of what her mission is. And so I think, again, Fish is going to have a lot of trouble here moving forward because there are too many forces, Liza, Carmine, Penguin, working against her and not enough working for her anymore. And that's going to be a problem. So that kind of wraps up my thoughts on characters, I think. Well, no. Let's talk about Bruce. Let's talk about Bruce, and that'll wrap up my thoughts on characters. Bruce in this episode tries to go back to school. He tries to reintegrate himself. And again, that goes back to what I said about him getting out of the manor and us seeing more of what made Bruce Wayne Bruce Wayne. Excuse me. And Bruce in this episode confronts a boy and his friends about his mother and his father's death. And they get into a fight, and that ties back into that theme of violence and fighting in Gotham City. Initially, Bruce gets himself beat up, and then he goes to Alfred, who says what happened, and Bruce tells him what happened, and Alfred, in true Alfred fashion, stands up with Bruce and says, "We're going to go ahead and we're going to get this solved." And the two of them confront the bully again, and Bruce beats the bully up with the watch, and we see a very violent and a very sad side of Bruce and a Batman that I think a lot of people forget. And I talked about this on Twitter. I said it's something that a lot of people forget, that Batman and Bruce Wayne is just a sad little boy, an angry little boy without his parents. And we saw the beginnings of that in this episode, and the way that the show handled that I thought was beautiful and was well done. It spoke, because we've seen his detective skills, all this different stuff, but the most important thing about Batman is his love for his parents and his anger, and, you know, again, going back to that idea of how close Batman came to being somebody like the Balloon Man or the Spirit of the Goat. He was this close, and it's gonna be a journey to see Batman sort of become Batman. And so I thought that was pretty cool to see that characterization of he's a sad, angry boy with a lot of violence in his heart and a lot of a desire for vengeance in his heart. And it's gonna take Alfred, and it's gonna take Jim, and it's gonna take a lot to keep Bruce Wayne on the right path. And so that's going to be the journey for Bruce moving forward, is learning to do the right thing and learning to fight that desire to fight, if that makes sense. To resist the desire to fight might be a better way to phrase it. So that kind of wraps up my thoughts on characters. Overall, I thought the episode was a very solid episode, and I enjoyed that theme of fighting and the idea of, you know, not just physically fighting, but spiritually fighting, mentally fighting. I enjoyed, again, the characterization of the Black Mask, Richard Sionis, and the flavor and the theme of Gotham seems to be taking these characters and giving a comic book twist to them, but also grounding them a little bit, but making them very unique within the universe of Gotham as a television show. Whether or not this is Richard Sionis, father of Roman Sionis, or Richard Sionis, the Black Mask, was kind of up in the air for me, and I was confused about that. But either way, it's a compelling villain and a compelling story. Either way, it's interesting. Whether this is Richard Sionis, and because the history of the Black Mask is kind of muddled, from my understanding, and kind of up in the air itself. So maybe this is his father, and you know, he's at boarding school or he's at home, learning from his father the warrior path and that sort of warrior theme, and being a fighter and being a warrior, and he's going to become the Black Mask, or whether this is just the Black Mask in his early days. it doesn't necessarily matter. It's still a good character. I enjoyed the character. I'm interested to see, because I've heard some things, but I'm interested to see again who joins up with Jim and Harvey and where that takes them. We didn't see a lot out of Catwoman this episode, of Selena Kyle, and so we did see at the very end her go back to Jim. We saw her in this episode steal some stuff, and so that's obviously something to look forward to next episode. But overall, this episode was solid. Again, nothing out of Poison Ivy at all, and I think that's a waste, but it's not taken away from what's going on, so that's good. That's a plus. But I think we need to see something out of Poison Ivy. Otherwise, why have her in the first season at all, really? We're almost halfway through the first season, and not a peep out of Poison Ivy is a little bit disturbing. But other than that, solid episode. I enjoyed it. And if you enjoyed this review, leave a like so I know I'm headed in the right direction. If you want to see more reviews like this, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. I do reviews of Gotham on Tuesdays, Constantine on Mondays, Gotham on Tuesdays, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. on Wednesdays, and Scorpion on Thursdays. Again, links for everything will be in the description. Like the video, comment down below, or talk to me on Twitter at the DH Reviews about the episode. Share this video, get it out there. Some very important news coming up probably tomorrow in terms of future live streams and stuff, so look out for that. With that being said, I've been Dharma Helper, this has been DH Reviews, and I will see you guys next time.